Live from the Jungle, podcast number 1.
It's the first title of our first
Live
ever
from the Jungle?
podcast.
Yeah.
Live from the Jungle. Welcome to our first podcast, Brett.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, co-host.
Yeah. I'm very excited to be here.
Good. Yeah, so let's start. Let's start with a little bit of who we are. I'll go first, interviewing you of who you are.
Ooh, this is fun. I like this.
Okay, so Amy Hall, that's you.
That's me.
Who are you?
I am the owner and founder of Goldilocks Goods. This is where we're recording the podcast from today.
Headquarters,
the wax factory, as it is lovingly known from time to time. And I am originally from Ontario and moved out to Victoria, BC, I don't know, about like 5 or 6 years ago. I kind of lose track of time every once in a while. It feels like I've been here for a long time.
you're in the right. It's between 5 and 6.
Yeah. But it's been great. Been able to put down roots. I feel like starting a business out here, it has also contributed to the fact that it feels like I've been here for longer.
Right.
I feel like there's a community, there's roots, there's a lot of ups and downs, but all in like a good way. Like it doesn't feel like, oh, I've been here forever and it's like a negative. It's like the positive side of, oh, I feel like I've been here for longer than that because I've made some really great connections and met some really awesome people, and we built a really awesome business.
Yeah.
But yeah, outside of Goldilocks, I'm sure we'll get into kind of like the founder story a little bit later on. Yeah. But me as a person, I actually have a background in art history. I love school. I'm a bit of a nerd that way, and did an undergrad and grad school in art history. So I have my master's degree there. Right. And then after that, I worked at a graphic design studio. I love design. I am admittedly not a designer, but I do dabble in things like Canva and whatnot every once in a while. And that's kind of a lot of what Goldilocks and our brand is kind of like built around, is just my eye and love for those kinds of things. And I also spent some time working as a wedding and event coordinator, which tends to throw people off. So I've had a bit of an interesting work history trajectory, as I know you have as well. But so yeah, never went to business school, never thought that I was going to be an entrepreneur. I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. Very much grew up more as like a self-identified crafter or maker or like DIYer. And I think I've experienced this both with myself and then with other people that I've met as well. A lot of people that live in that world don't think of themselves as entrepreneurs. Like it seems like there's this weird division of categories, and you think of like an entrepreneur as someone maybe more in the tech world, or like someone who's getting like venture capital. And if you're a maker, you're not like quite in that same realm. You're not a business owner, right? Which we'll talk about as well on this podcast, and that kind of transition and how that all actually overlaps way more than I ever thought it was going to. But I love sort of being in the water, around the water. It's what drew me to moving to Victoria. For anybody who is listening who does not know where Victoria is, we are on an island just off of the west coast in BC.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful place to live.
It's pretty great.
It's a pretty awesome spot.
Yeah.
So that's
Amy.
kind of me in a nutshell, the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, on your point of entrepreneurship, I see you can define it in so many ways, right? I totally understand what you're saying, where like I'll get in my head sometimes and I'm like, oh, I'm like not a very good entrepreneur. But really, it's like the definition is like, do you make money in a business that is kind of all on you, right? It's like, are you at the top? And we're kind of like share our roles in and around the top of the business together, but nobody else is really responsible for bringing in the money except us.
Yeah.
So then by that definition, it's like, we create our own value in the marketplace, and that is where our income comes from. Yeah. So I guess we're entrepreneurs.
And we're leading the way too for the business as well, right?
Exactly.
We come up with ideas. We kind of like, we have a team, and we wouldn't be here without our team. But like at the end of the day, it's like we're at the helm of the ship. Yeah. And at the end of the day, if the ship sinks, it's on us.
Yeah. We go down with the ship.
Yeah, exactly. That's no one else's fault. We can't blame other people. Totally. You have to take ownership of all those kinds of things too. So I think there's that component as well. Yeah. So Brett, tell me about yourself.
Oh, right. Me.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Brett Higson. My position at Goldilocks. Well, let's not get into that first. Let's go back to who I am.
Brett the person.
Before we jump forward. So I also moved to Victoria about 6 years ago. I got here just like a year before you.
Yeah.
which was really good timing because by the time you got here and we met, which we'll get into that cute meet cute story that we had, I knew some people, so I was able to kind of to get things going there.
To interject, some people is an understatement. I moved here and felt like you knew everybody in this entire city, but continue.
It felt that way. It was the easiest city that I've lived in, of just like getting hooked into a network and meeting people. And there's some key people that are very important in that. But grew up in Ontario as well. Little tiny town outside of Hamilton, which is near Toronto, if nobody knows where Hamilton is. And I've always dabbled in entrepreneurial activities growing up. I remember, getting paid to cut grass by my dad and being like, one of the first thoughts in my head was like, I wonder if my neighbors will pay me to cut their grass too. So there was a little early inklings there, like going and finding golf balls and selling them, like eBay shop, like reselling some goods. Me and my friend tried to like flip a few things from garage sales and stuff. Didn't really work out, but there was always like little attempts. And school was a huge challenge. I did well in school, but I would say that my focus was just not there at all. Whenever I would have to be told to do something, that's when I would pump the brakes and kind of like start to find an exit strategy of how do I do this in my own way. So I did some work in various contracting businesses across the country. And then came out here, was doing some stuff in real estate, kind of just jumping around to various entrepreneurial activities. And then was really just searching for something that I could be proud of and interested in and build like a really cool team around a product or a service that actually like made a difference. And what I mean by that is, I installed internet service for a while. That was great. People need internet. That's cool. Did some stuff in real estate renovations. That was great. It's kind of cool doing that, but it still didn't feel like there was like a deep connection to what was going on. So then when I met you and you started talking about these cool little beeswax wraps, and I had just found out about them like the week before, that's when it was like, oh, holy shit. Like this could be something here that maybe if we team up, like we'll feel each other out. We'll see how it goes. But that was a big moment. Mm-hmm. So let's get into that. How did we come to be? What's the story there?
Yeah. So I feel like I always love telling this story because it's like a very serendipitous moment of like when I first moved to Victoria. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. We're going to do the long version. How do you feel about the long version of this story?
Yeah, we got time.
Okay. Maybe we'll backtrack just for half a second for anybody who's listening who doesn't actually even know what Goldilocks Goods is.
Yeah.
And then I'll jump into that.
Cool.
But basically, we're an eco-friendly goods company. So our foundational product is reusable beeswax food wraps. We make all of them here by hand in Victoria. That was the first product that I had kind of started making on my own. And that was what I was doing when I met Brett. So just to give you guys all some context, we've now expanded into other product lines, things like that. But when we're talking back in the early days, the only thing that we were making was these reusable beeswax food wraps that are an alternative to plastic wrap in the kitchen.
Right.
So that's the short version, just to give a little context of our meet cute
the humble beginning
kind of setup. So I had moved to Victoria in kind of like the spring, I think of like 2016, something like 2017.
2017.
Yeah, hadn't met yet. Thanks. Brett's the numbers guy. Hadn't really met like a lot of people. Was just kind of feeling out of place in like a sublet apartment that I knew wasn't going to be permanent. Was still just doing Goldilocks on kind of like on the side at that point. Had another job that I was doing online that like paid the bills, paid the rent, all that kind of stuff. And had a moment when I was answering emails one day where I realized I actually enjoy answering all of the emails that pertain to Goldilocks. And I would do that first as a way to kind of avoid the other job that I was actually not supposed to be doing. I was doing that job, but I just got more excited about anything to do with Goldilocks.
Right.
And so as soon as I kind of had that aha moment, I was like, I really would love for this to be a full-time thing, but like, that's going to take time. I also don't know anybody here. I can only do so much as one person. Like I can only make so many beeswax wraps in a week. I can only attend so many markets. So it was on my mind, but I had no idea like how that was going to come to fruition in any way, shape, or form. And I was at a market, and who ends up being a friend, somebody that I knew, came by the market, and we got chatting. And I had mentioned that I was looking for an apartment because my sublet was about to end. And this person had got very excited. I kind of saw this, like, glimmer in her eye. The wheels were turning.
Yeah.
She asked a bunch of questions, like what I wanted to do, what I was going to use the space for, how long I wanted it. And finally, at the end, she said, well, I actually have an apartment. I was going to be giving up the lease because, like, I've been living elsewhere, and she was subletting to 2 people, but those 2 people were going to be leaving shortly. And I said, I would love to come and take a look at this apartment. She was also a fellow business owner in town, has like the most beautiful aesthetic. I was like, I don't even need to see photos of this place. Like, I know it's going to be stunning. I know it's going to be a beautiful apartment. I just want to come check it out. So we set up a time to go view the apartment. We get there. To the best of her knowledge, both of the people who were living there at the time were not supposed to be home for this viewing. So we kind of just barged in, light, gentle knock. I don't even remember if we knocked or not.
No,
or we just kind of came inside. And then it turned out that the message was not relayed to both of the people who were living there. And so somebody was still home. And the person that was home was Brett.
Me.
So that was the first time that we ever met. Was a bit of a fluke. Brett was not supposed to be there. His roommate Mackenzie did not relay the information that we were coming to view the apartment.
Is it Mackenzie's fault?
That's what I was told.
Right.
That's the story I heard. So we'll just stick with that for the sake of the story for now.
Either way, I was fully clothed, so nothing weird happened. I was just working from home that day, and then you came, and I was like, come on in. Yeah. Britt was like, oh, I'll come back later. And it was like, no, it's all good. Like, what's going on? Yeah. Join the party. I was obviously trying to avoid my work as well that day.
We were like, we're so sorry and so frazzled. So I viewed the apartment was stunning, as I kind of expected it to be. Fun. And I was specifically looking for a 2-bedroom apartment because I wanted kind of a separate space to be making beeswax wraps in. I wasn't ready to have a commercial space. It was still something I was going to be doing from home, but I wanted to kind of separate a little bit and have a little bit more room to play around with. So this place was a 2-bedroom. We looked around, and then I remember just kind of chatting at the end because, like, you're also friends. Britt is the woman who owned or was subletting the apartment.
Shout out Pico Collective.
Yeah, we love her.
Smell their honey tobacco candles. It's the best shit ever.
It's addicting. It's it's like it's actually the only scent that I own, or the only scent that I wear. Yeah, I'm like a full convert.
There's a cloud of it in Victoria.
Yeah,
going amazing. Everywhere.
But yeah, so go check out Pico Collective. We love Brit. Yeah. But you guys all kind of knew each other too, outside of, like, you guys were also friends too, like with Mackenzie, right. And that was a little pod there, and so we kind of just chit chatted with you. She was kind of catching up with you for a little bit. Fun fact of the day as well. I don't know if I think I've told you this. I don't know if this is actually something that you're aware of or not. Oh, so you can tell me if you know this or not. I was going through a breakup that week.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think I didn't know it at the time, but like months after you did tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember that very vividly because I was like very just like out of it and like distraught, and it was like a very difficult breakup and messy and like all of the things. And I remembered walking in and just being like, shit, there's somebody here that I don't know. Because I was just like so
rattled.
Like, you just don't want to talk to people. You don't want to see people. I remember wearing like a hat and like sunglasses. Like, you're kind of trying to hide from the world at that point. But we had a lovely conversation. And then I remember you guys were talking about like your van. Like you and Mackenzie, something about vans came up, and like being on Vancouver Island too. Like, that's a whole culture here that I love and appreciate, and think is really cool and unique. I think it's grown in other places since then, but I feel like at that time it felt like kind of more of an island thing for a little bit. That's
especially coming from small town Ontario.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I thought, okay, cool. And I was like, oh, Britt was like, we should all hang out sometime. And then that was kind of the end of that. And I was like, I might see that person again. I might never see this person again. And then 2 weeks go by, and I was at a farmer's market. You'll notice a trend. I did about 3 farmer's markets a week. There's a lot of farmer's markets in the early days, so you'll hear about those. And I remembered seeing you, and I was like, oh, I know him. What do I know him from? Yeah. what was his name? I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And then you were kind of standing off to the side because I was talking to a group of like women about my beeswax wraps, and you came over and I was like, oh, and because I meet so many people at markets, I'm just like bad at remembering names. And also I feel like people come up to me a lot as if they know me. And because maybe I'm like the one person that they met that's new at like the market that week, whereas I would have met like hundreds of people. Right. So it's like, it's hard sometimes to keep everybody kind of straight. And when it's out and when it's, and when it's not in context, like if it's a different context too. And so then you came up to the booth after and I was like, Brad? I remember I got your name wrong and you were like, no, it's Brett. Like, you're moving into my apartment. And I was like, oh yeah. And we like chatted for a little bit. And then I still remember this very vividly as well. So this is funny because I'm curious to know if this is something that you remember or not. You were like, well, we should exchange numbers and we should like hang out. And then there was a pause and you were like, and like do things that friends do. Like you were like trying to make it clear, like, I'm not hitting on you. Right, yeah. And I just remember there being that like pause in between and then it's being like, yeah, do things that friends do. Yeah. And I always thought that always still makes me chuckle. Yeah. But yeah. That's what I remember. And then
I don't remember saying that.
You don't,
but it sounds like something I would say. Yeah. Yeah. Just to be non-threatening, be like, hey, meet new people. Let's hang out. Yeah.
Yeah. You're very good at networking or also just like making new friends and like meeting new people and like chatting. And then we didn't like start, like we were talking about what I was doing a little bit when we first started hanging out because we met.
That's what I knew about you.
Yeah. And that's like what you knew about me. Yeah. But I feel like we became very fast friends. Mm-hmm. Like it was a very easy kind of transition into being like besties.
Right. Yeah.
Which was awesome.
Yeah. We just started hanging out a bunch.
Yeah.
It was great. And I tricked you into helping me one night.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
That's how the work relationship started.
Yeah.
So me working and doing my little thing with real estate was working with my friend Mackenzie. We were living at that apartment at the time. And him and his mom and myself went in on a house together and we were moving, 10 minutes up the road. And that's why we were leaving the apartment. So part of the, work that we had to do on that house was renovate a couple of the suites to get some renters in there. And Mackenzie had a surf trip booked. I think it was a photography gig that he actually had booked too. So it kind of fell on me that I had to finish the renovation on this one suite. And at like, the 11th hour, it's like the day before the tenants are moving in. And I'm like, I still have to do a bunch of painting. This is like, I'm not going to make it. I kind of called some other people. And then I was like, oh, I don't know, see if Amy wants to like help me paint. And so I call you up and I'm like, hey, you want to come over and do some painting? And then you're like, yeah, sure, let's do it. Like way too excited. And I was like, wow, she's so excited.
I think the phrasing to clarify was, would you like to come over for a paint night? So I was thinking
that was a subtle trap.
It was going to be like one of those fun, like you drink wine, you're like, you're both like painting this, like the kind of cheesy, like you're painting the same photo and you just like see, like I thought we were just going to hang out and be creative. And like, it was just going to be like a couple of hours and then I was going to go home.
Right.
That was not the case.
Yeah. You showed up and it's just like full renovation zone. And you're like, oh, we're like renovation painting. And I was like, yeah, of course. Here's your roller. Like, let's go. Yeah. And so it was awesome. We got it done probably by like midnight or something. The suite was ready to go. Renters moved in. Everything was good. I was super grateful to Amy. And in return, I was like, okay, you've been telling me a bunch about this beeswax wrap company. It sounds pretty cool. I'll come make beeswax wraps with you for an entire day. Because I think I was like 4 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
It was a significant amount of time that we made beeswax wraps.
It was a pretty big chunk. And I think at that time too, I was also, I don't want to say complaining, but I can't think of another word, but I was like, had mentioned to you, I think on multiple occasions that I was having a hard time keeping up with production, which is a great problem to have.
Yeah.
But going to 3 markets a week, I was at a point where I was actually couldn't keep up. So I was selling out every time I went to a market, which is very stressful because I didn't have a lot of time to kind of get caught up in between, just with the spacing and the cadence of when the markets took place. So yeah, you were like, well, in exchange for, helping me, I'll help you get caught up and we'll just like spend an afternoon or a day or whatever, just like making beeswax wraps.
Yeah.
And the great thing about the way we were making beeswax wraps at the time. So by this point in time, I've now moved into Brett's old apartment.
Right.
He actually helped me move out and move in.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. That was like
we did a lot of favors for each other.
Yeah. And so we were making beeswax wraps in Mackenzie's bedroom, basically.
Yeah.
Which was always kind of a funny joke that we would make. And then, yeah, the way that the setup is, I'm trying to get people to so that they can kind of envision it, is we're basically standing on opposite sides of a table from each other, facing each other. And the way we made the wraps then is like slightly different than the way we make them now. They're a lot more efficient the way we do it now. But you're essentially just, adding a beeswax mixture of, beeswax, tree resin, and jojoba oil that's all melted together, and that gets saturated into cotton. So whatever kind of, tools we were using at that time to just take the beeswax and saturate the cotton. Usually there's some kind of hot plate involved. So you're kind of just facing each other, and you're like busy with your hands, but not doing something that actually really requires like a ton of focus. Like I would say it's kind of akin to like someone who's maybe like who's been knitting their whole life.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can kind of just go, once you've been doing it for a while,
Totally.
you can kind of just go into this like autopilot mode. So it's actually very zen and very calming and very therapeutic because you end up having these like really cool conversations with people. And that's kind of been a trend, especially like in the early days of Goldilocks when we were still making those wraps in the apartment, was like you just end up getting like real deep real quick because it felt like a safe space, and because you didn't have that like awkwardness of like you're kind of partially occupied. So I feel like it kind of takes away some of your anxiety and it kind of like calms you down, and then you're just like, well, now we're just gonna like shoot the shit. But I feel like a lot of what we talked about in that first session was like the things that I love, the things that I'm good at doing. I think you might have even asked me. I think you might have even said,
I was probably
like,
probing a bit.
Yeah.
Of like, is this a business opportunity for me?
Well, also, I just feel like you as a person are very inquisitive and you're very
curious.
good at asking questions.
Thank you.
We also have a bit of a standing joke that Brett has made pretty much everybody at the office cry, not in a negative way, but because he's really good at pulling stuff out of you when he can just tell that something is off, and rather than just letting it like gloss over and pretending that something's not happening. So I mean that in a positive way.
Yeah, rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, either happy cry. Sometimes it's happy cry. Sometimes it's just like, I know you're having a tough time. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So you're just like very good. You're very like emotionally intelligent about stuff like that. So I feel like, I think you might have even said to me like, well, what is it that you're loving about the business? Or like, what do you hate doing? Like, what would you want to offload? Like those kinds of questions.
Right.
And it became very apparent very quickly that all of the things that I loved, you had no interest in. And all of the things I hated, you were like very keen about.
Right.
I think our bios on the website actually say that we're like the yin and yang in terms of our strengths and weaknesses. And it's a very accurate description. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. It's, I was talking to someone at the little networking event yesterday about this. And I was like, they were like, oh, so how does it, you guys kind of like operationally, you work like every day together? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, how long? I'm like 5 years. Like, oh, wow, that's pretty great. You must have like a really, strong relationship. I'm like, yeah, we do. And we also have this unique thing where we get along very well, but we'll never step on each other's toes with stuff. We collaborate a lot on decisions together. Yeah. We'll make decisions about the business, like higher level stuff about, money or marketing or whatever it is. We'll always kind of check with each other and get that. But it's like, we'll never want to do the other person's job.
I have no interest in doing any of the things that you do. And I feel like you feel the same way.
Same way. Yeah. Yeah. Like marketing, branding, design, managing the website. It's just, I'm more of a, numbers kind of behind the scene logistics. But then also working with the team, working with people, there's like all kinds of different stuff there. But we've found this like interesting kind of space where we just like fill the gaps for each other without pissing each other off.
Yeah. And I think
I told this to someone last night and they're like, wow, that's pretty rare. And I'm like, is it? Because like this is the first business, both of us have been in, aside from I had a little contracting thing. I had like one or two guys like working underneath me as contractors, but like a business with like everybody's in here together all day, every day together, like working alongside each other for years. And there's payroll and there's benefits and like really building it out. It's the first time either of you have done this. So for us to like hit it, I don't know. I feel pretty grateful and lucky that happened.
I feel the same. I feel like I've had conversations with other people and it's like realizing in hindsight how rare It is because we're also friends. So I think that
Right.
that's something that like I've had some conversations with people who, you know, there's always people who warn you about going into business with your friends. And I think there's a lot of legitimacy and reasons why I've seen that be problematic for people.
Hmm.
But I also have a couple friends who I've seen it work like really amazingly.
Right.
But I think it's because there's also just like a very deep level of just like trust
Hmm.
and like knowing that like neither of us is ever dropping the ball on anything. Like I never
Right.
have to worry about like, you know what I mean? I just know that if
Yeah.
you say you're going to do it, it's going to get done. And I also know that you're like good at all of those things and that I don't have the skill set, and just trusting you in your skills and not being like, well, I'm going to micromanage you. Why would I do that when it's something that I actually don't know that much about, nor am I good at? Like that's not good for anybody.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
So I feel like there's that, like also that plays a huge role. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that actually us being such good friends before we started working together also played like a really big role in that,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like we developed like a really good sense of just like vulnerability and like openness. You know,
Totally.
like I've never felt like either in the business or with like my personal life that there wasn't something that I could just be like, Brett, I need to talk to you about this.
Right.
You know, even if it was something about like you, you know,
Right.
or
Right.
like something that we needed to have like a conversation about, or something that's like not working well in the business. Because it like neither, and I feel like you, I would like to think that you feel the same way about me, but it's like, because I feel like we can have conversations about the business or like about the way we're operating in it, and neither of us takes it like personally. Like I know
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, we're always going to be friends,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and I always
Totally.
know you're going to have my back and you're going to be there to support me.
Yeah.
So it was like having that as a foundation, I think is very unique
Mm-hmm.
for a business partnership as well, in that sense. And it just like for us, I think it just worked perfectly. Like it just translated so well into like running a business together. We
Yeah.
are kind of like the mom and dad, but you're more like you always like to say you're more like the fun uncle,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
of the business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to feel that way about it. I mean, you know, but at the same time, that's just a bit of a title, like pretty intertwined in at this point.
Yeah.
And here we are, almost 6 years later. It's crazy. Um, the ups and downs and shit that we've been through. That's pretty wild. I remember just another point on just seeing that when we started having those business conversations and we're like, should we team up? Should we do this? And it was just kind of like a, you know, fuck yes from both of us. That was really huge to see how both of us were just like, yeah, like let's go. But then another thing, which I just want to highlight for everyone here, with my background of like personal finance and then like running my own business, my own contracting business, I had like a pretty good um, sense for like what needs to be done to start something. And I asked you, are you willing to work for free for the next year? And you were just like, yes. And I was like, wow, that was way too fast of an answer.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, let's go then, because that's what we're going to do. So
Yeah.
we just made a commitment. You know, there's a little bit of market cash here and there
Yeah.
that helped us a little bit, but
Yeah.
we relatively took no money from the
No.
business in the first almost like, I want to say almost like 18 months.
Yeah.
It was challenging.
Yeah. There was some ups and downs. There were some panicked phone calls. Like
Oh, yeah.
I think that we both did really well with that. And yeah, it's funny to think about now how like I don't know if I'd be willing to do that again at this stage in my life, right? Like
Right.
it just was this like kind of perfect timing where I had actually just left the job that I was doing in Ontario.
Right.
And I actually really loved working there. And, you know, I paid really well. I loved the people that I was working with. This was when I was doing like wedding and event coordinating. And I actually still keep in touch with like the owner and just like love that whole family that I was working with there. And because to give context, it was I was doing a wedding and events, but it was on like a 75-acre farm property.
Right.
So not like as a wedding planner where people would like hire me individually. It was like I worked for the venue and planned all the weddings that took place there.
Yeah.
And we took care of everything. We did like the catering, the flowers, like all that kind of stuff. And I loved it. And I had been there for I think like 3 years. And it was also interesting. So that job was the first 3 years that business was like kind of getting off the ground. I was their first full-time employee. The job I had before that was also the first 3 years of the graphic design studio getting off of the ground. So I feel like I had this like level of understanding of what actually went into like getting a business off the ground and like how much work you have to put into it, and like had seen like the ups and downs. And in a lot of ways for both of those businesses really felt like I had a level of ownership, or like, you know, I'm a bit of an A-type personality and I just like love to succeed or like do well.
Right.
But I wasn't actually a partner in any of those businesses. Right. So in this, it just seemed like an easy kind of like transition. And when I had left that last job, part of why I had wanted to leave was because I wanted to move to the West Coast. So I really wanted to give living in kind of like Victoria area. Originally it was going to be Tofino, but wanted to give it a go and wanted a change in lifestyle. I was like super burnt out. Was like, doing weddings is exhausting. It's like, a lot of draining energy, both like kind of mentally and physically. Didn't want to be living in my hometown anymore. And knew that, I was going to have to make some sacrifices. I think when you make a big lifestyle shift, that you're going to have to make some pretty big changes. You're going to kind of have to suck it up for a bit if you're going to want to succeed in like a different endeavor. And for me, I would have way rather just like gone full in and not paid myself for a year. And even if we failed, have been like, well, we tried.
Yeah.
And like, you know what? We'll figure it out. This
Absolutely.
is the theme of the podcast, potentially the name. We're currently undecided.
We're working it out.
But one of the things that has been a theme, I think, for us is whenever there have been challenges or hurdles, like since the beginning, has always just been like, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Like we always do. We always figure it out.
Exactly.
And that's something that has remained. Like there's so many changes I feel like that we've gone through in the last 5 years, but that is something that has remained the same. And the attitude that I feel like we go into like any kind of challenge with. Not to say that there are not meltdowns sometimes before and after or around those conversations or during. Like we're human, it's like the emotions happen and panic calls happen. I still remember, just to get back on the whole like not making money for a year thing. I think this is a funny story, a little anecdotal, but I think it's entertaining. Calling you because I was having not full-blown meltdown, but I was having a moment.
We'll call
it a moment.
Tiptoeing on the edge.
Yeah, I was on the edge. And I was like, Brett, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I was like stressed about the fact that we weren't like making money. I was like, I think I might need to get a part-time job. And you just
quit your part-time job.
I know.
Maybe this is like 6 months.
It was a little bit farther in. I think we'd been doing it for a bit longer.
Yeah.
And I feel like you did a really great job at talking me off the ledge. But my favorite part of this story is that days later, I found out what you were actually doing. Would you like to tell that story?
I was sitting at a bar, probably 3 or 4 pints deep, with a couple of my friends, and I just stayed on the phone with you for 20 or 30 minutes. Kind of just told them they were fine. They were having their own conversations. Jeff, our buddy, was bartending at the time.
Also a business owner, so he gets it.
Yeah. You'll hear more about Jeff throughout we'll probably have him on.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
And I just kind of held it down, and I was just going to stay on the phone with you as long as you needed to just talk some sense into being like, you don't need money right now, And again, like it's a different story when you're 29 versus 36, like things change. You have more responsibilities. Like, a lot of people would say it doesn't really matter whatever age you are, but it depends on what's going on in your life. And, we were both at a point where it was like, we have a little bit of rent to pay, we're young. We were both like single at the time, I think.
Yeah.
Various, who knows, living the single life. And it was just like, we're like, well, what, like, if we don't try this now and take this big, crazy risk to do this thing, and just like my position of the fun uncle in the business was always like, I am here to support you in your entrepreneurial dream. And I just remember I kept saying that to you. I'm like, and you're not just going to what are you going to do? Go get a job? Like, how about we try this for like a few more months? And then if it really doesn't work, then you go get a job. So it was almost kind of just like trying to get you to postpone that way of thinking.
Well, and I think
it's like the job's always there. You can always have a fallback plan.
Oh, 100%. And we were in a really kind of similar position, I think, in that we had both had jobs before we moved to Victoria that allowed us to put some savings away as well. Right. So like we did have the benefit of kind of being in that where there was like a little bit of cushion to be able to, like be able to do that for a while and experiment with that. Sure. And I still remember, because this was a piece of advice that I know we've talked about since then, but was the first time that I think I had ever heard that. So it was like, I still had some of those savings, but I was just like stressed because I didn't want to have to like draw too much into them. I didn't want to have to take off. I was like getting to a point where I feel like I was maybe getting nervous about the savings starting to dwindle and that kind of thing. And I might butcher this. I'm going to paraphrase it. And maybe you can explain it better. But I remember you saying something in the vein of like, well, your money is just sitting in a bank and like it's not making any interest. So like, essentially, if you can think of you taking money out of your savings so that you can like pay your rent while we do this, you know, experiment of diving into the business, that's going to be the best investment that you can make with your money in the long run.
Right.
Right.
Investing in yourself.
Exactly.
Right. Because it's like, if you do make it in a business and entrepreneurship, then it's like, then that's yours. Like, you've done it, and like, you're there, and you can build a team of amazing people around you. And maybe one day you can sell that business, or the business can just like live on. Like, it's like something that you have created that has intrinsic value. Right. And it's, you know, maybe hard to like put a value on that, but it's like came from your own, like the concept of like sweat equity, right? It's just like, that's really what it was about, is just like, take the money out of your shitty bank that's doing nothing. That's just a number that makes you feel good, that you look at probably a little bit to be like, oh, I have this like safety here.
Yeah.
And like, you know, put it in yourself and just see what happens. Because it's like, I think we can both say this is like, whatever's happened with the business or whatever we've gone through or whatever will happen, the amount of shit that we have learned through this experiment of building this business is, you can't put a number on it. Like, we can just sit and talk to people now, and they bring up stuff about business, and it's like, oh yeah, 2 years ago we went through that. Here's what we did. And they're like, whoa, that's crazy. And it's just like, shit. Yeah. Like,
oh, I thought that was normal. Like, it's like, you don't know what
you don't
you
know what
actually
you know.
Yeah.
Until someone like, you know, asks you a question about business that you're like, whoa, we were in that mindset like, you know, 3 years ago, where we like just starting and we didn't know how to set up a Shopify store, whatever it was. Right. And now it's just like, you know, we kind of joke sometimes. This might be, you know, no offense to anyone who works at Shopify, but
we love you. We love you, Shopify.
We love you, Shopify. But, you know, we joke like, we could probably just go and get a job at Shopify. Like, we've been running a store for 5 years.
We
like,
know
if
the
all
ins and
hell
outs.
breaks loose.
Yeah, we know the ins and outs. We could be the chat support in a heartbeat.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, well, there you go. Like, we've created an own, like, you create these different fallback plans, you know, where like there's a million different things that I could go do in the finance world of like working in business now. I don't have a finance degree, but I had like 5 years of managing budgets and like payroll and bookkeeping and all this stuff that just like I had to learn. You know, I had to like learn alongside other people working in the business. And now I know that. So it's like this strange way of taking your money, investing it in yourself. You also like kind of bulletproof yourself or recession proof yourself. If the business ever failed, it's like, we've got skills.
Yeah.
We got a lot of different skills that like we can take some time off, you know, pick any one of the like 10 hats that we each wear and be like, I'm going to go do that and go apply to some places and work for, you know, another business. And I think that's what I was trying to get at, is like, you put that money in yourself and like, you're going to have that insured down the road future, like you're good.
Well, it's sort
you've
of
got
similar.
The skills to, you know, pay whatever bills you need.
Yeah. And it's going to pay off in the long run. And I think that the perspective shift for me was a big one, because I very much like would have had no problem spending that money on like tuition fees.
Right.
Like going to school. Like I love school. Again, the yin and yang, like we're total opposites when it comes to stuff like that. Like, you know, the university world and academia is like made for the way that like my brain operates. But I also recognize that's like not a world that I think everybody should go into. I think like only very specific, like not people, but like it's a broken system for certain people in the way that it like, and the expectations of what you want to get out of it potentially. Right. But for me, it worked really well. But aside from that, I was like, yeah, I would have never like, essentially, I feel like that's what that money was. It was like, by paying myself, we often joke that the first year of running the business was our business 101 schooling.
Right.
The second year of running the business was like business like 200, you know, like each year was just like a different class that we had actually been like, what we, in terms of like the skills, like even probably more so than potentially like going to a more formal school education or training, like what we were learning was massive. And so I feel like you were able to kind of like shift that, because that wasn't something that I was used to thinking about.
Right.
You know, I was much more used to like a more formal kind of education side of things. And so to kind of turn that around and say like, no, this is an investment in yourself. Like I could start thinking of it as like, paying myself tuition for in the real world of learning, essentially, right? Like that hands-on experience.
That's a great concept. I just love the way you said that, of like stacking some money in a job that maybe you don't love, or you know it's not going to be your thing forever, and you know that you want to do something that's like closer to your heart, start a business or go out and, you know, be self-employed, be a freelancer, like whatever that is, go out on your own. It's like thinking of that money that you're making as like future tuition for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm going to take this and I'm going to go to my own school of just like figure it the fuck out.
Yeah.
Which is really what it is when you sign up to go. And anybody who's a freelancer or who's worked on their own independent, there's just all this extra stuff that you're like, oh, this is why there's value in like being an employee and working for someone, is that maybe you only got to wear like one or two hats.
You can
The
be more
second,
focused.
exactly. The second you go out and it's just like, oh, I have to do my own taxes. You're like, oh, okay, so I guess I got to figure that out. And then there's just all these other like, oh, I got to figure out how to market myself. You know, there's these little things that pop up. You're like, I've never really thought about marketing that much or like wanted to do that, but I guess like it's time to figure it the fuck out. Like, so I signed up for it. And so you're forced into, it's like you're backing yourself kind of into these little corners that you gotta like fight your way out of.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make it out, then you have the knowledge and the expertise now to like take it to the next step and like continue to move down that path.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fight.
Yeah.
It's always a fight.
Yeah, it's definitely a battle, but it's like definitely one worth fighting.
Absolutely.
Like, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
What level of business do you think we're at now? Like, what year do you think we're in grad school now? Like, is that where our like equivalent?
I mean, I don't know. The humility in me wants to say that we're not even close to grad school because like, what's the ceiling on building a business or building a brand, right?
That's what I was just thinking about, because we haven't used that comparison for a long time. Like, I feel like the first 2 years maybe we did, but you know, in traditional schooling, you'd have like 4 years, and then grad school, we've been doing it for what, like, you know, 5 or 6 years now. It's like, I still feel like I don't know anything sometimes.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'll have a day and I'm like, what? Like, I know nothing about the way that, you know, the business operates or this or that. But I think, you know, those are the bad days. But I think we do know more than I think we give ourselves credit for. And I think what we're hoping with the podcast is that, you know, some of that will come to the surface.
Yep.
And hopefully we'll be able to have some interesting conversations and questions and kind of pull that out of each other, or have maybe some guests on and have them pull that out of us and kind of share that with the world. And we just love talking about what we do know and like being able to share that with people, because I do feel like when I first moved here to Victoria, there was a very open community of business owners, and I really appreciated that. And I know that that's unique and that doesn't exist in all parts of, you know, the country or other countries. You know, if this podcast blows up, maybe we'll be international. But that was something that I really appreciated when I moved here. It was a very interconnected business community, small business community. And people were always willing to grab coffee. Like, I was always very intimidated to ask, you know, like friends, like one of our buddies now, Jeff, again, we'll mentioned him earlier. I think you and Mackenzie connected me with him because I wanted to like learn more about what he was doing with his business. And I was so worried about like interrupting his time, and had this like kind of vision of what I thought like a business owner did in a day, and like the attitude that they would have. I was just very intimidated. And we went for coffee, and I think we were there for like 3 hours, and like now we're all really great friends, you know? And then he introduced me to other people. And then like it became this really awesome community where people are very happy to talk about what they're doing, what works for them, what's not working for them. And it's not this like dog eat dog competitive, like, oh, if you do well, that somehow is like harming my success. It's like, let's just all like do this together and like be happy and live this like awesome life. And if I know something that's going to help you in your business, like I'm more than happy to chat about it, talk about it, you know, and we're obviously only really sharing from our own personal experience. So some of those things may not apply to other people's businesses. But we can really only talk about what we know.
Yeah. Some of them do, some of them won't. So, like, there's so much luck in business. There's so much, you know, let's just try this and see what happens. And sometimes you try like 5 things and then something works and you're not even really sure. Like sometimes you don't have time to really be like, oh, what worked here? You're just like, oh, okay, there's sales. Like something happened and it's so let's get back to work. Like, let's keep going. It's like, it can get so fast paced and blurry, but I think the beautiful thing of entrepreneurs supporting each other is that even with us being able to have each other in the business as like, you know, co-running the business together, it still can feel lonely as we're like internally in the business. And you're like, you know, there's been so many times too where sales start to fall off, or something goes sideways, or you lose a big wholesale contract. And there's this creeping doubt of like, is this it? Is this how it fails? Right? So there's this like insecurity of like, what did we do wrong?
Exactly.
You want to hold yourself responsible because there's no one else to hold responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really good thing to have, I think, as a part of your, DNA, like being at the top of a business, is to always be introspective, to be like, is there anything we could have done to avoid this?
Yeah. How did we contribute to this situation?
Yeah. How do we get back on track? How do we get into action to like take the steps to get back to where we wanted to, direction we wanted to be going? But then having other people that you can lean on and talk to, and people at various stages, like someone who's been running businesses for 10, 15 years, they'll have different insights than your friend who's just starting, who's just a year in, right? And like everybody has these weird perspectives that are very unique to them, but are these like crazy aha moments for your business too.
A lot of overarching connecting themes and threads that you go, oh my gosh, I thought that was only unique to me and my business.
Right.
And you're like, oh, it's not.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like such a good feeling.
And it's the same thing about, like you can relate it to just like general mental health, right? You have some like shitty problem going on in your life. It's easy to like get a little bit too pulled into yourself and think that, like, why is this happening to me? Like I don't deserve this or whatever, like that kind of just slipping into a bit of a depression, to think like, if everybody else, like looking at other people and putting them on a pedestal, like, nobody else has this problem. Then you go sit down with some other small business owners. They're either in it, or they're going through it, or they're just got to the other side of it. And it's a beautiful thing. And I share that same appreciation and love for the small business community here in Victoria. And one thing I will add to that too is that being from this cool little incubator in Victoria where everybody is helping each other, you can then take that and, kind of spiral out. And that's one thing that I do a lot with like our wholesale stuff, is like, I want to talk to people on the phone. When we get a new account or something like that, like I want to have an email exchange. Not everybody wants to talk on the phone. I get it. Sometimes I try and force phone calls with people. They don't answer. That's fine, but to get that, like, I'll spend 15, 20 minutes just talking to someone. They just started a new refillery store and they're 6 months in and they're having an inventory issue or something. It's like, yeah, well, let's talk about it. Like, what kind of system do you have in place? And just kind of go through those steps. And like, cause you're like, this is hard. I've been through it. Like, you want to help people.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big intentions for this podcast, is we want to provide value to people. We want to take all the shit and the dirt and like the glory of what we've been through in this 5-6 years now, and get it out there. So maybe it will help one person, 10 people, kind of help them out of a tough jam, or just to push to a different level in their business and keep going.
Pull the veil back, right? Pull the curtain back. I think there's a lot, like I said, when I first started out too, there's a lot of intimidation. Because it seems like everybody else has it figured out when you're kind of first starting out. Even now, like, we look to other like really big brands, and then you kind of start to hear insights of like, their internal communication systems aren't that great. Or like, you make a lot of assumptions. And I think kind of pulling that curtain back and seeing a little bit of the behind the scenes of like, this is actually what's going on, and knowing that nobody knows what they're doing. Right. Like quite literally. None of it. Like anyone I've ever talked to that's a business owner is like, yeah, we're figuring it out as we go, because it's constantly changing and it's constantly evolving. And as soon as you think you've become an expert in one area, something changes, you need to pivot, you need to do something else. And I mean, neither one of us have kids, but I feel like it kind of feels like what I would expect parenting to be like, like there's not really a rule book.
Right.
Everybody kind of has their
guidelines.
Yeah, their own unique approach. And like, clearly there's some like really big red flags of things you should do and shouldn't do.
Right.
But outside of that, it's kind of like, it's like a really interesting, fascinating world to see all of the different paths to entrepreneurship that can be taken. Because I feel like it's almost infinite.
Yeah. Absolutely. Should we wrap this up here for the first one?
That feels like a good spot.
Before we go, just to provide some people some value here in this first podcast, let's go with, what do you think? This is going to be hard, so take it from your top 5, but I want one just for time. What do you think the most important thing that you focus on in the business? So you go first, and then I go.
Now or in the beginning or both?
Just in general, like business philosophy, what is the most important thing to focus
To
on or
do?
think about?
I feel like this might be a little bit more philosophical. So let me know if
Perfect.
this is not, if you want more tangible,
Okay.
concrete. We can
Yeah.
move on to like 1A and 1B or
Yeah.
something. I think one of the biggest takeaways, and I feel like I tried to do this actually fairly consciously in the beginning of building the business, was to trust my instincts.
Mm,
And that's something that does admittedly get a little bit harder. I feel like as we've gotten a bit bigger, it was a lot easier to do that when it was kind of just like me or me and you. Um, but I feel like that was always a path where I was asking myself, like, are we in alignment with like the core of what I want this business to be?
mm,
Right? Being an eco-friendly brand, we obviously have a very strong kind of like ethos and value system, and really just wanting those things to like remain true and authentic to what I believe and like why I founded the business and like why we
mm.
started. And I feel like there were so many moments that I had, especially in the early days, where there were just these little light bulbs of being like, this is a sign that like
Mm.
we're on the path that like we should be on.
Right.
And there would be times when maybe not so much, and we'd be like, well, maybe we need to not go in this direction and we're going to redirect.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that means like turning down things that you thought you wanted from the
Right.
business, you know, like making those hard calls, but like kind of also just being honest with yourself, or like knowing that like we all know, you know, we
Yeah.
ignore
Deep
our
down.
intuition, we ignore our gut, we take advice from a lot of other people, I think, which is great. And I still think it's good to like have those conversations. But I think at the end of the day, especially, I mean, it depends what your business is, but especially for Goldilocks, it was so personal to me.
Right.
You know, Brett calls me Goldie. Like I am
Yeah.
Goldilocks.
Yeah.
You know, like you can't get, you know, more in line
Right.
with the brand in terms
Yeah.
of being like the person and the founder than that. So keeping that in mind,
Yeah.
I think is a really big thing, that like your intuition's there for a reason. And if there's some things that are, you know, spidey senses are tingling in a positive or a negative way, I think that that's probably like the biggest thing that most business owners could take away.
Yeah. There are those shiny objects, right?
Yeah.
That kind of come in. You know, we've talked to people who wanted to buy a part of our business early, and there's some spidey senses tingling there, and it just,
Or big corporate, like big
yeah,
corporate
big companies wanting
accounts.
to work with us, but the terms were shit, and they
Mm-hmm.
weren't willing to negotiate, but they were selling us the world, and you're like, this doesn't feel right. Like
Yeah.
something's wrong with that
Something's off.
gut, where
Yeah.
you're like, sure, it'd be great to be attached our name with this brand, but the way that they're doing it is just, it just feels wrong
Mm-hmm.
and dirty, and it doesn't align with our values, and maybe it aligns with somebody else's values, but
Mm-hmm.
like not ours. And
Yeah.
then you have to like walk away from it, and you're like, wow, that doesn't seem like that was a smart idea at the time.
Yeah.
But
And
then it works out again. Like you stick to who you are and what you care about and what you believe in, and it always works out. And that's a tricky thing to trust sometimes when, you know,
it's a
there's
lot of
you're running out of
self-doubt.
money or something.
Yeah. Or you think like, am I ruining, like, is this going to be the decision that folds the business?
Right.
Right. Like there's a lot of self-doubt that creeps in.
Yeah.
But again, I think we keep always saying, I think we're going to tie the figure it out into the name of the podcast somehow, but it's because we always do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
What about you? What would your one big takeaway
People.
or piece of advice?
Yeah, if I'm just going to think of what I focus on daily in the business is people, and that's it's so all encompassing. It's our customers, it's our business partners that we have, the various businesses that we work with, all of our retailers, and then our like internal team. Right, like how do people feel at work? Like we, you know, we do little 2-word check-ins every morning, just to get a vibe for like, are you in a bad place this morning? You know, if you are, just tell us. We don't need to know why. We'd like to keep it open, of just, you know, you're more than welcome to just like tell us everything that's going on in your life. And like, we'll just listen. We're just here as a safe space to just like hear that and get through it. But also just to humanize everything and understand that like, that's all there really is in business. It's just a bunch of people running around,
Just people.
whether you're customers, whether you're business partners, whether they're on your team. And like, we all have to understand that like, at the end of the day, we're all just trying to like get through our human experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, and do something fun and engaging that makes us money, that allows us to live a good life. And so, yeah, focusing on the people aspect and just like really bringing that in. Like, we're just humans running around, and it keeps me in my like moral center as well to not do something shitty. Right. Because I'm like, if I do this short-term thing that, like, you know, you've trusted me with all the money in the business, which was a huge thing to trust me with. We didn't really know each other that well. And
I think you still have access to my personal banking. I wouldn't be surprised if you still like have the lots.
I took myself out of that because I was like, this is too much.
But that's what I mean. I'm like, I to this day could be like, Brett could just go into my checking account.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because like that's how much I trust you. Where I'm like, yeah, that doesn't. I don't even think twice about it.
There's these crazy times too. There's like, you know, whatever it is in someone's, you know, brain or my brain, that's like, you get these little shitty ideas and you're like, well, anybody know? And it's just like, whoa, like, what are you doing right now? And just being like, if you did something like that, do you understand how many people that would impact? Like, really think that through, like, go through the exercise of like, if someone found out, or if I just did this and I didn't want anybody to know about it, and I was going to, like, you know, try and get away with something. But if someone found out, would people trust me anymore? Right? Is it worth breaking trust? Like, how hard is it to rebuild back trust with people? Just people in general. Like, and that's your customers, that's anyone, right? So like, that's one thing that I think about is like, how do the things that we do affect people? And
build empathy and trust is kind of what it sounds like, whether it's like a customer or like within our own,
and just be real with people.
Or like,
and let people be real with you and encourage them to be real, and just like, I'm not gonna judge you, like, just tell me what's on your mind and let's like talk about it, and then, you know, let's get back to feeling good, or like maybe we need to feel fucked up for a while and like get through it, and then we'll be stronger because of it. So
awesome. I love that.
Cool.
Well,
okay,
we'll wrap that up.
Episode 1
fully complete. I think in the next episode, maybe we'll dive in a little bit more into like the actual full founder story. I feel like we have our like meet cute here, and then we'll
of like how it really started.
Like really, we'll go back a little bit farther even.
Okay, so, cool. Go back a little bit farther, and then we'll get into some of the juicy inner workings of what we're doing here. Share some, I don't want to say secrets, but just our story that, you know, hopefully will help someone.
Some of them might be secrets. We'll see. We'll see where it goes.
Love it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone.